All right, welcome back to the Conviction Fiction, the podcast where we challenge the stigma of life after lockup and highlighting the voices that are rewriting their stories. I'm your host, Antoine Rivers, and today's guest is living proof that redemption isn't just possible, it's powerful. Joining me today is Matthew Stevens, a regional detox specialist at Harbor House in Arkansas and a fierce advocate for restorative justice and alternative sentencing. But his journey here wasn't easy. Matthew spent 18 years in both federal and state prisons, serving five separate bids, and at one point was labeled incorrigible by the U.S. government and sentenced to 15 years. Additionally, now as an armed career criminal. So today we're going to unpack a lot of his story because of instead of becoming a product of the system, he became a challenge to it. While incarcerated, Matthew earned over 10 college certifications, guys, and came out with a bachelor's level education. More importantly, he came out determined to break the cycle that nearly took his life. Today, we're diving into his story from meth addiction and incarceration to recovery and leadership. We'll talk about why our current prison system is broken, how education became his lifeline, and what real justice looks like when it's rooted in healing instead of punishment. Trust me, guys, this is a conversation you don't want to miss because this is the Conviction Fiction. All right, I'm back. Matthew, let's start at the beginning, bro. I want to first thank you for joining today. I know you've been living a hectic life for the good since you've been home.
Yeah.
But let's start from the beginning. What was life like for you growing up in Arkansas?
Man, growing up, I came from, I guess you could call the American dream type family. Both of my family, I guess you could say there was faith based. We didn't go to church a lot, but they had a Christian foundation. And we grew up in an all white culture, all white society, pretty much. And so I was taught what would be considered the American norm, the way that my parents understood it, and that was predominantly white Christian culture, which is fine, and I don't oppose that at all by any means. But that's the environment that we grew up in Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess my dad had a good job at a corporation, and I was spoiled growing up. We had four-wheelers, we had motorcycles. I grew up it was on a historical street. My dad had a good job, so he could afford one of those historical houses that you redo.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like in the hood. And so I grew up in the hood, but with, I would say, the American white privilege is what a lot of people in America would call it.
Okay.
And
So, let me ask you one question. So, when did substance use and criminal activity first into your life? Because I mean, as I'm listening, it doesn't seem like you should have been doing that.
Yeah, criminal act. Well, the substance abuse happened actually. When I started getting off, hanging out, doing what we do in the hood, and that's getting into a lot of fights and getting into. I grew up in the early '90s. I was born in '76, so I grew up in gang culture. I grew up in the crack epidemic. I grew up, exposed to all that stuff that America offered at that time, and I didn't actually start getting into substance abuse until I actually got transferred to the upscale school, where people were more prevalent to use substances. The school I came from, people were selling it for survival. They didn't exactly use it. But then when I switched schools in about the 10th grade, I was exposed to a different culture, and that was a substance abuse culture and a party culture and stuff like that. And
Right.
I started experimenting at that young age with coke and meth, and I became addicted. I started snorting meth, at 17 years old. And all my high school dreams and everything that I wanted to do in life, had instantly been substituted with that addiction and that substance. And what happens, obviously is, you're either just going to dope fiend all the way out in the streets, or you're going to sell it to support a habit. And, that's what I turned to was, trying to sell it to support my addiction.
Yeah.
But I started involving myself in, getting addicted, in high school. I was an addict in high school.
Let me ask you this. So was there a point where you realized you were caught in a cycle that you couldn't escape? Or is there ever a point where you like, man, this is kind of bad for me?
Yeah, man, I didn't hit that point until about my third trip in prison, when I got caught up in recidivism and I got put into the cycle of just not being able to make it anywhere except prison, because doing all that amount of time, even though you just go down for 1 or 2 years at a time, but they were back to back. And the way that the system was set up back then, we didn't have all these specialty courts. We didn't have all this drug court, mental health court, rise court, veteran court, DUI court. So we just all went to prison. And, I hit that point of no return on my third trip to prison when I said, hey, you know what? I will never be anything other than a convict and an inmate, because I can't make it out here in society.